Hi there, my name is Jen, and you can find me on my social media either as Jen Lee or Jen Lee Schoolcraft. And I'm excited to be here today for Inktoberfest Day 12, and we're going to do lots of different things with clear ink. So I hope you're excited to join me today. I am super excited to be here with you. And throughout this video, I'm going to be using the Color Hive Clear watermark ink pad, and that's all I'm going to be using. I might not show all of the stamping just because it's pretty repetitive over and over. So let's jump right in and get started. The stamp set I am using for this first technique is called For You My Dear, and I am using a piece of British Racing Green cardstock. For this technique, you're going to need a colored cardstock or a tan or a black. Anything but white will work. And I've just inked up my stamp, and I have stamped that image on that green cardstock. And as you can see, it's going to leave what looks like a watermark, or it's also could be considered a tone on tone. And then you can also do this with a stencil. So I'm using a dauber to just ink up that dauber with the ink pad, and then pushing that through the stencil, and that's going to give the same effect of that watermark look or the tone on tone. And for this next technique, I'm using one of the Inktoberfest tags because these are available in the shop as well. And I went ahead and I stamped up this really cool Gingerbread Village from the Gingerbread Village stamp set. And I'm going to dry it this time. So instead of leaving that watermark ink wet, I went ahead and dried it. And then I'm going to take my blending brush and I'm going to apply some inks over that. I am using Raw Skirt, and the one I'm using right now is called Limewired. And this just needs a light covering of ink. I was a little heavy-handed with that Limewired, so it's really hard to tell. But this is going to give you a really subtle look. This would be a really nice, subtle background, just a really muted background. But I think it's a really pretty effect. And I have gone ahead and I stamped up that same gingerbread stamp again. And this time I'm going to use some Kaleidoscope powder. And I'm getting out all my little tools that I use when I use the Kaleidoscope powders. This one is called Raw Skirt, and I'm using the blending brush or the applicator brush. And I have dipped that in the Kaleidoscope powder, and then I'm just going to do a pouncing motion all over that stamped image. And once I have that completed, I'm just going to tap any excess back into the little pot. And then I'm also going to tap the cardstock to get any excess off. And then I'm going to use my rainbow powder brush to brush off any remaining powder. And due to the nature of the ink, which is a little bit sticky, that powder is going to stick to all the little details of that stamped image. And then on the other side of that same image, I'm taking a little bit of purple chalk, and I'm applying that with a brush as well. And it's going to have the same effect. It's going to stick to that wet embossing ink or watermark ink. And to make sure the powders stay put, I'm going to grab some hairspray, and I'm just going to do a light spray over the tag, and that is going to set these images so that there are no little stray pieces of powder moving around. Next, I'm going to stamp up this dahlia from the You Dahlia Stamp Set, and I'm stamping this up using Tiptree jam ink, and then I'm going to clean my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp again using some clear embossing ink. And what this is going to do is allow the image to be embossed. A lot of times dye inks dry fairly quickly, and so it's a little bit harder to heat emboss those and get that raised image than it might be for a pigment ink. And so this is a great way to get that look, and this is also a great way to seal your image if you would like to add water to a water reactive ink, but you don't want that stamped image to move around, which water reactive ink does. And so this is a great way to seal it so that you can go ahead and add different layers to your project without having that ink move around. Next, we're going to use some clear ink over a blended cardstock. So the color that I'm using for this is a palm tree, and I'm just going to take my blending brush and blend that over the tag. And then I'm going to take one of the sentiment stamps from the same stamp set that this dahlia flower is from, and I'm just going to stick it to my fingers and ink up the tag, and then I'm going to cover that with some clear embossing powder. And then I'll use my heat tool to heat up that embossing powder and melt that. And this is just going to give a really subtle textured look. Next, we're going to use some pigment powders, watercolor powders, shimmer powders. There's lots of different names for these, color bursts. And the stamp that I'm using for this is called Flirty Flamingos. So I've already went ahead and I've stamped that up. And the first powder that I'm going to use is one of the Nuvo, I think they're called shimmer powders. And this one's called Cherry Bomb. So I've just spread a little bit of that onto my cardstock, and I'm doing basically the same technique as I did for the Kaleidoscope powders. I am pouncing my brush to get that powder to stick onto the watermark ink. And then I will go ahead and remove the excess. The only thing that's different about this is you can leave it like this and set it with hairspray. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to spritz this with some water to activate the powder. And I just want a light mist of water on the cardstock. I didn't want it to puddle too much or distort the image too much. But as you can see, it kind of bleeds out. This is more of a solid shimmer powder. There are lots of them that burst out in different colors, and that would look really awesome with something like this. But I'm going to go ahead and take a stencil and use the watermark ink through that stencil, and I'm going to add some Nuvo, and this one is the Nuvo Shimmer in the Solar Flare. And again, I'm going to pounce my brush to get the powder to stick to the image, and then I'm going to really lightly spritz this and then heat set it. And this gives it a really fun look, and you can see the shimmer and the shine from those shimmer powders. And so next I'm going to do a resist technique using some watercolor, and I've already stamped the flamingo image again, and I'm using some watercolors and a fairly wide brush. This is the widest I have, and I've just gone ahead and I'm going to do just one layer of watercolor over this image. This is a very subtle effect, so if you use more layers of watercolor or whatever medium you're using, it's going to hide the image where you can't see it. You're probably going to see it, not be able to see it really well in this video. It's very faint. It's just one of those really cool background techniques, or just some really subtle background. But to show it off a little bit better, I'm going to use a stencil, and I'm going to take that embossing ink and push that through the stencil again, and then I'm going to use a little bit of purple watercolor and spread that over the panel so you can see a little bit better how that ink resists. And then you can go ahead and let this air dry, or even take your heat tool to it to get it to dry. But another really subtle technique that's just super fun. It's so fun to experiment with this and try different layers, or layer things differently and see what works. You can use this with acrylic paint as well. It just has to be watered down a bit, and then you can add different layers on top of that. It's just really cool. This was so much fun. The next one I'm going to do is a shadow effect. And so I've taken some colored cardstock and I've inked up the word Dahlia in the clear ink. And then I'm going to clean that stamp off and dry it off. And then I'm going to offset it from the original stamp just slightly. So I offset this to the right. And then I'm going to take some black Eclipse black ink and stamp that, and then it gives a really cool shadow effect, and I just love that. I think it is so cool. And so next I'm going to use the Joseph's Coat technique. I have never done this before. I went ahead and I ink blended some acid wash and raw skirt, and I made sure it was completely dry. So I've never done this, so I'm following instructions. I made sure it's completely dry, and I also put a lot of my anti-static bag on it before stamping it up with this image. This stamp set is called Chin Up Buttercup, and I've stamped the embossing ink and then covered that with clear embossing powder. And now I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. And then I am taking the Eclipse black ink again. I'm just swiping it over the entire panel. This kind of reminds me of the olden days, I guess you could say, when we would create a paper with all kinds of colors and then color it with black crayon and then make those little scratch marks. This totally reminds me of that. But I think the effect is really pretty. And that is my last technique with clear embossing ink. And I went ahead and I grabbed two of the tags that you can either purchase from Maker Forte, or you can use your own tags, or if you bought the Inktober a box or kit, it will have your tags in there along with a ring to hang them all on. I just went ahead and I wrote down the little things that I did so that when I flip through these I can remember what I used where. And so this one was the shadow, the clear resist, creating emboss over dye ink. And I'm going to get out my little key ring and add this to some of the other tags that I've already created. I'm a little bit behind on watching the video, so I don't have all of my tags, but I'm going to go ahead and add this to the back, and then for each video that I watch and create using the techniques and tips that are shown, I will go ahead and add more tags to my book. I'm a little behind, like I mentioned. This tag right here is from the video that I did on the 10th with heat embossing. So if you're interested in that, that was day 10. And so that is it for me. I really hope you enjoyed and that you found something interesting or useful. And I'll be back later on this month with some foiling, so I hope you can stop by and join me for that. And don't forget to check out the Maker Forte Instagram page. There will be giveaways on their Instagram page all month long, so be sure to check that out. Thanks so much, and I hope to see you next time.